Welcome to Aerospace Horizons. Today we've got a very special interview with a U.S. Navy Blue Angel legend. He's the only person to command the Blues 3 separate times, and he was featured heavily in the 1994 documentary Around the World at the Speed of Sound. And he's an executive producer on the new film, just called The Blue Angels, releasing in IMAX on May 17th and Amazon Prime Video on May 23rd. Captain Greg Wooldridge. Boss, welcome.
Hello, Evan. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. This is awesome.
Glad to be here also. It's surreal hearing you say those words to me. So we're going to talk, obviously, a lot about the upcoming film today, but I wanted to just kick it off with a few questions for you about your time on the Blues. Sure. And I wanted to know, what was your first experience with the Blue Angels, like seeing the Blue Angels? Were you a kid at the time, or was it not until later in your Navy career that you came across them?
When I joined the Navy, I went into what was called Aviation Officer Candidate School. And I wanted to fly multi-engine big airplanes in the Navy, frankly, so that I could fly for the airlines later. You know, that was my goal, because I'd already started a family, which is not wise to do in college, but I did. But I had my degree, and it was time to go to work with the military. So I picked the Navy, picked aviation, got selected for that. And I remember being in Aviation Officer Candidate School. We had Marine drill instructors, is where we went to learn how to do the military thing, which was great. They were awesome. Harsh at first, as you got used to it. But I remember marching, learning how to march on what we called the grinder, on the old PBY piers there, or old piers in Pensacola, where they used to drag the planes up up the ramps out of the water. So we're walking down, we're marching, and all of a sudden this roar goes overhead, and it's 6 F-4 Phantoms painted blue. I thought, oh, so there's this kind of stuff too. What a knucklehead. I just didn't know it, and it started changing my mind and making me think, man, you got to fly jets. I didn't, when you see something like that, you're so awed by it, but you never really put it on your list of must-dos. I mean, I didn't, but I was certainly impressed, and I certainly thought flying jets is probably what I want to do. That was my first look at the Blue Angels.
And what made you later on decide to apply for the Blues?
I think every Navy pilot wants to do something like that, or would have it on their wish list, right? Maybe far out there, like it was for me. I was sitting in the ready room one day on the Midway before it became a museum. It actually was a fighting ship. I was leading a squadron. I was the CEO of a squadron, and a note came in saying, "Hey, we need applications. Anybody wants to apply to be the flight leader of the Blue Angels?" And I thought, oh, wouldn't that be swell? Oh man. And I saw that. And I thought, they would never pick me. I don't have anything special in my background. They wanted you to be a squadron commander, show that little bit of leadership trait, and have a certain number of flight hours. And I had plenty of flight hours. I was what we call in the Navy a bagger. I had tons of hours, so that wasn't an issue. But I just didn't, I didn't have the confidence or self-confidence that would be something I'd be picked to do. But I was looking around, and my junior officers were in the ready room there, and I said, look at this, and they said, oh, they called me Skipper, the commander. And hey, Skipper, you need to apply. And I said, they never picked me. And they said, come on, you'd be good. You'd be a great Blue Angel leader. And I said, no. And then they said, besides, you'd get us all front row seats at the air shows. And I said, oh, okay, there's the motivation. And I went off the rest of the day. And the next morning I thought, you know what, if you have an opportunity and you don't even take a look at it, don't even give it a try, how are you ever going to know? And that stuck with me all my life. Getting into the movie, I thought, why not? And I ran for office here in the beautiful state of Oregon. You never know. You never know what's gonna happen. So I applied, and mysteriously, I was selected to lead the team. And that's how it all started. But again, don't turn down any opportunities you have along the way.
That's so interesting. Usually it's you hear the opposite. It's the leader, the mentor pushing the younger folks to step up to the plate. But in this case, it was kind of reversed.
Well, I would do that. I would encourage, and I wanted, one of my thoughts in leadership all along was continue to develop the people around you. In fact, develop them so well that someday they take your job. I wanted them, and I wanted them to see that it was fun and not this onerous, heavy burden that's on you all the time. And it is, you can't be burdened, but you got to make it look like it's rewarding and that you're enjoying it in a fashion. And so I just never thought I'd get it. That's why I didn't apply. But I did that in the people that worked for me. I encouraged them and showed them a way forward.
When you become the Blue Angel flight leader, obviously you become known as boss. But before that, you had a call sign of Rugdance, and I know there's a lot of aviators who have stories about their call signs, and some you can share publicly, and some you can't share publicly. I was wondering what kind of story you had, and if it's something that you can share here, or if you need to plead the fifth.
Well, the term is much more innocent than it sounds. It's about what happened to me, pressing the edge of the envelope, doing things mostly in flight that, I always, if it didn't say you couldn't do it, then you could, so I was always, trying to do something better or more exciting. And I did a few of those. And as always, I got caught. And as always, you need to admit, and fess up and be honest, tell the truth. And I told my commanding officer, that's, yeah, that was me. And so when you're in front of the commanding officer, it's generally a carpeted office. So you're being called on the carpet. And then standing in front of the desk at attention, with your nerves blazing, your feet start shuffling. And they called that a rug dance. And I did a few of those, probably, I won't say more than a few, but yeah, probably a few of those. And I got the call sign. And they said, hey, did you go in and do another rug dance? I said, oh, man. Yeah, I got to work my way out of another one. And so that's how that stuck on me. I didn't like it. And like most call signs, if you don't like it,
that's it.
Got it. You're going to live with it. So now it's my email address and everything. I gave up. Okay.
You got to embrace it.
It's a fun story, I think.
Awesome. So I want to transition over to talking about the new film that's coming out here.
Sure.
There have been several documentaries, obviously, about the Blue Angels over the years. Several great ones. And I wanted to get your take on, why make another one now, and also why did you want to be specifically involved?
Well, it wasn't so much to get me specifically involved. So go back 5 years. 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I called Rob Stone, who was the producer of Blue Angels Around the World at the Speed of Sound. And we had remained good friends over the years because he went to Moscow with us. He went to Europe with us. He and his small crew and his then new production company filmed us, and we became really good friends. And we have stayed friends since the 90s. So I said, I'm thinking, there's not much about the Blue Angels out there 5 years ago. Not in the headlights, right? Peripherally, there's always been some good stuff. I mean, what a fascinating thing to document what the Blue Angels do, right? And so I called Rob and I said, hey, Rob, 2019. I said, look, the Blue Angels 75th anniversary is coming up in 2021. I said, look, we have plenty of time. Let's get this and let's hammer it. And by the way, in 2021, the Blues were and did start flying the Super Hornet. So they got a new jet. It's the Diamond anniversary, tie that into the Diamond formation or whatever. It's the 75th of the Blues. Let's knock this out of the park. And we started off small ball, and Rob said, of course, let's do it, boss. He still called me boss. Let's do it. Let's get it done. I said, all right, let's go to the usual suspects. I envisioned he and I doing it, with his production company, and then seeing where we'd go with that. So we went to some of the usual pro-military corporations like Boeing and USAA and Southwest Airlines, and they were all excited about the idea. Southwest Airlines was having their 50th anniversary, I think, coming up, or more, maybe it was their. But anyway, they had an anniversary coming up too, so they wanted to kind of link it together. And we're talking money. Rob and I are thinking if we can get just shy of 7 figures, if we can get $1 million, we can make this thing, right? And it looked like we were going to get it. And then what happened in 2020? The coronavirus.
No idea.
I don't remember. Trying to forget, right? The coronavirus, and a lot of people got very conservative with their cash. And so we went on hold, and I was still doing public speaking, and I had the pleasure and opportunity to speak to the crew of the movie Devotion, which was about a black naval aviator shot down in Korea and his wingman crash landing intentionally to try to save him, to get him. He was stuck in the cockpit. He was alive. Jesse Brown, he was alive, but couldn't get out of the cockpit. So his wingman, who played by Glenn Powell, intentionally crash lands, gets over and tries to get him out. Unfortunately, it was just the cockpit was too rigid and too deformed to get him out, and the story goes on. So they were filming that in central Washington because it was a Korean War era story. And they had MiGs, they had Bearcats, they had Corsairs, they had all kinds of cool airplanes there, but no actors. But just doing the filming for the aerial part, and the coordinator for that was Kevin LaRosa, who did the coordination for Top Gun Maverick. And so I give him a keynote about safety and how to reach the pinnacle of success and everything you do, which is what I love to share with people. And we got done, and he said, "Well, what else are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm trying to make this movie, trying to get this movie done." He said, "Well, what's it about?" And I said, "Well, it's about the Blue Angels." He said, "Look, Glenn Powell, who played Hangman in Top Gun Maverick, he loves the Blue Angels. He grew up with a Blue Angel poster in his bedroom in Dallas, just loves them. Let me see what he can do." He called Glenn, and Glenn said, "We got to make this. We got to make this happen." So back to your question is what made me so involved was that having led the team 3 times, when you bring outside influences into the Blue Angels, the most crucial thing you have to watch for are distractions, because distractions can cause accidents and mishaps, especially in that environment where even the slightest thing can create an issue. So knowing that and having been on a set for the production of Around the World, and also for the IMAX movie The Magical Flight, I did a little bit of that in the mid-'90s too, an earlier institutionalized IMAX production. I knew what was important to protect from distraction. And so that made it really important that I was able to build trust with the flight leader of the current team, me being a former flight leader, build that trust and explain to the production crew what we might be able to do and what we can't do and what we should do, remembering all the beautiful things that are sometimes not out in front that you get to work with on the blues. So that's how I was positioned for that role. And because Rob and I developed this idea and this story, that's how we got to be executive producers. But both of us were with the production team for a long, long time. So how did we go? So Glenn Powell said, "Let me get you with Creative Artists Agency out of LA, the best representation in the show business world." And they put us on virtual, everything was virtual then, right? Virtual meetups with some of the most important producers in Hollywood, because I had to have 3 things to satisfy the Navy screeners to let us embed with a Navy unit. One, they had to love the concept. They love the concept. Important for recruiting. I saw it as a great thing for recruiting, but I also saw it as a way to raise the morale of the United States, people in the country, because there had started to develop, well, it's already well developed, polarization, right? And I thought, if we can just bring everybody together and watch this movie and enjoy American exceptionalism, frankly, enjoy that. So those were motivations. So the Navy really loved what we were going to do, but they had two more things that we had to satisfy. That was money for production and a way to distribute. So that's what I was looking for, what Rob and I were looking for on these Zoom calls. We found finally, after David Ellison he has a beautiful production company. I think he's about to buy somebody too, like Paramount. So he does really well. But he said, I love the idea, but I can't afford it right now. We moved on. A couple other productions. Finally found Glenn Zipper, who works with Bad Robot, who is owned by J.J. Abrams. Well, I guess I don't know if owned is the right word, but he's a big influencer in that business, in that company. And apparently they got the news to J.J. Abrams, and Glenn Zipper said, hey, we're going to do it. I mean, we were just blown out of the water with joy. But then we needed to find somebody that was going to pay for it still. And that's when IMAX, John Turner, the VP of documentaries at IMAX, said, we are going to do this. There won't be anything more powerful than the Blue Angels 6 jets up there on the most powerful presentation media going, the IMAX screen. And so he brought IMAX into it, and we were off and running. And so we filmed all of 2022 with the team and a little bit into 23, which was important because we captured the fact that Amanda Lee, the first woman in the formation, was starting her flying and getting her feet wet in what was happening. And I mean, feet wet is a very light term. She was, obviously fully involved. You have to be. So she did great. So that might be long, but that's kind of the backstory.
I guess I'll piggyback off what you were just saying about Amanda Lee. I know she was in the trailer, and you said she is going to be featured in the movie. I had a great experience last year taking my daughter to see her fly for the first time, and I just wanted to get your take on that barrier finally coming down.
I led the team in the 90s, and we had women naval aviators, women fighter pilots. People would always come up to me and say, when are you going to get a woman in the formation? I said, it's going to be in the next couple of years. It's got to be in the next couple of years. That's the 90s, right? It didn't happen until 2023. I don't know. There were applicants. I remember seeing applicants. In fact, I endorsed this little age man endorsed the daughter of one of my wingmen in my first squadron. So his daughter was now a fighter pilot. I endorsed her to be selected, but she wasn't, but went on to do great things anyway. So yeah, it was just long overdue. No answers as to why, but there aren't as many women in the fighter cockpits as there are men. So the selection process remains strong, and it's unbiased, and so it's not going to favor one way or the other. So it just took a while.
Got it. Well, it happened, and we're all glad for it.
And she's awesome. She's awesome.
Jumping back to the production of the film, you mentioned Kevin LaRosa and his aerial unit. Can you walk us through sort of the methodologies behind filming, like the techniques that were used? And you can feel free to get technical if you'd like. I have a filmmaking background, so I'm
okay, sure.
all that stuff.
Our director of photography is Jessica Young. She's terrific. I mean, she'll go to the extreme. So a big factor was we had to make it for IMAX. And that doesn't mean you go out there with your little Polaroid and start, or whatever, So we had to use Sony Venice 2 cameras, which are fairly large, and then the big, the big lenses to capture and figure out where to place them. And we wanted to be inside the airplane, but we couldn't afford to do what Paramount did, building mounts in the cockpits and renting airplanes from the Navy, basically paying them usage fees. Everything we did had to be part of the Blue Angels mission, and that's public relations is a major part of that mission. So we thought, how are we going to get this done? So Jessica and I went to Patuxent River, the Navy test pilot school, where they test weapon systems and a lot of other things. And we got together with those folks, and they have a mount that we could place a Sony Venice camera in the mount on an airplane. And that's one of the things we wanted, but they couldn't be one of the airplanes in the formation because it would mess up the dynamics, the flight characteristics of the airplane because of the drag. And so they used to do flights called cowboy flights, where they'd take another pilot. In this case, it was Bub Lance Benson, a former Blue Angel, still on active duty, still worked with the team to support them. And he would do cowboy flights. He would fly around the formations. And so we mounted the camera on his jet, and we got some great shots from that, air-to-air shots, beautiful, with the big camera. The other thing we found finally was a camera that you could suction cup inside the airplane, inside the canopy, right? Or behind the pilot, or, just about anywhere you could make it pop and stick, right? And it was called a 1RS. And it's so highly sophisticated, and it's right at the edge of being IMAX quality. And we did a bunch with that, different scenes. And in fact, there was a 1RS under the chin of the number one jet. They've always had a bubble mount there, right? And it looked aft, and it's a great camera. We got some of that. So the 1RS gave us tremendous shots. When you see the very close formation shots, that's generally with that 1RS camera. So those are some of the considerations. And when you're ready, I'll start talking about when we brought Kevin LaRosa in.
Go ahead. That was going to be my next question anyway. I want to hear about the helicopter.
So we got a hold of Kevin. Kevin, we need you. Buddy, we need you, my friend. And so he had a helicopter, a French helicopter, and we're in Pensacola, and he brought it down from Atlanta, on the front of the helicopter. And he's done so many movies that he already had this rig, I called it a ball turret on the front of the camera, right? We could actually get a Sony Venice camera in that piece of gear. Kevin in the right seat, Bub again, Lance Benson in the left seat, Michael Fitzmaurice in the third seat with the camera controls, and telling Kevin, hey, we need to come a little more to the right. I want to catch this, And so we had that going in Pensacola when the team was back for a week off, practice and rest. And so we were able to capture a lot of the air-to-air. So I was pretty nervous about it, frankly, as a former leader, because what we were going to do was put the helicopter in the air, flying back and forth around as each of the different maneuvers came in, the solos coming in, the diamond coming in, finally the delta coming in, and being in the right position, not to get in the way, but being really close. It was so well briefed, and Kevin LaRosa is such the consummate professional, that we were able to put it up and get it done. It just, and I thought, there's a call out you can make as the flight leader or anybody in the formation. You say no maneuver. That means you stop, level your wings and knock it off, knock that maneuver off. And I told boss Brian Kesselring, the boss of the team in 22, I said, hey, boss, I wouldn't be surprised if you got a bunch of no maneuvers today with this helicopter thing. But everybody was so confident that it was right because they briefed like 4 hours off and on to know exactly where to be. And Bub, the former Blue Angel who had flown every position except the lead, knew exactly where to put the helicopter for each maneuver. And it was spectacular. That said, we even bonused that up, if you will. Hired a guy out of L.A. to bring out his camera system called the Phantom camera. It does over 1,000 frames a second. You get, I think they said you would actually load up a data card in 10 seconds or something like that. But it can give you 6 minutes of video. And that's where we got the beautiful slow motion stuff you'll see in the movie with the vapors coming off as the plane pulls through the afterburn. I mean, that was a big bonus for us. And so that camera was mounted in place of the Sony Venice in the nose and the front of the helicopter. So that's where we put that and got tremendous shots there. So our only disappointment with bringing Kevin was, and it wasn't him, it was the weather. Carl the fog, or whatever it's called in San Francisco in Fleet Week, there's a fog that comes in under the Golden Gate, and sometimes goes away and sometimes doesn't. We kind of got, in 22, we kind of got weathered out, and that was a really big disappointment because we had Kevin there to capture, what a great backdrop, and we got some video there. But anyway,
I was there last year, 23, and the
weather was good, right?
On the sun, it was good on Saturday, but Sunday was like exactly what you were talking about, just a giant fog cloud right over the Golden Gate Bridge and nowhere else. Clear skies everywhere.
Yeah, and you think, well, let's just go flying. Well, no, you got to see the ground, you got to see the checkpoints, right? And by the time we would call it off, that I flew 4 weekends there. By the time we'd say at 3:00, we'd say, okay, it's too late. So we're in Oakland, where we staged, and I said, let's just go. So we go back to the city in San Francisco. By the time we get there at 3:30, the fog had moved out. We go, can we go get in the airplanes again? No, it's too hard, too late. All the airspace had expired. Challenging, but anyway, we got to do. I remember being on top of the Trump building in Chicago, really the tallest viewpoint in the city, with our cameras, with the Venice, and no guardrails. They had a rail around there, but it looked like a railroad track. That's where they dragged the window cleaner thing around you to attach to the top of the building. Otherwise, so I'm up there, I'm crawling out to the edge of the building and look over the side, and my eyes are big as saucers going, yikes. But we had a lot of fun in Chicago. The weather, again, was a challenge, but the team still flew, and we got some good shots there. And we went to Hawaii. We filmed in Kaneohe Bay. Beautiful, lush. The contrast of colors was fabulous. Just all over the place. It was great.
Is there any, one shot in the movie that, every time you see it, you're just like, I can't believe that this is real?
Well, I'll have to say, a lot of the slow-mo stuff, the high alpha, where you've got 5 and 6 right next to each other, mega angle of attack, that coming by the helicopter sitting over here watching this section of airplanes come by. Whoa, that's one of my favorite shots. And then just some of the high G vaping, those are great. Just some of the touching shots too, like flying into the sunset, of course.
Yep.
And within the cockpit, inside the cockpit shots is one of Whiskers, Julius Bratton, pulling G's, and his face is just distorted from the exertion of G tolerance maneuvering, making your body tight and bearing down to keep from passing out. That's
actually a pretty good segue into something I wanted to ask about, which was the human element of the movie.
Yeah.
Obviously the technical stuff is really great and kind of selling the tickets, but the human element is what we all go to see movies for. So what can people expect to see from the pilots and their sort of more personal lives?
There's some great stuff with the troops, the real backbone of the blues, the young men and women. I call them young, and everybody's young for me now, but the young men and women that make those airplanes ready to go, and with an incredible attitude. They own that demonstration, and our respect for them couldn't be any higher. And that was what was beautiful about making the team so strong, and about the fact that the glad to be here quote was was what reflected that, and bolstered that. No matter what kind of day you had, when you said that, you were talking to the person next to you, the other Blue Angel, saying, "Yeah, I'm glad to be here. No matter what kind of a crummy day I had, I love you, man. I love you. The brotherly, sisterly love thing to show that you trusted. So there was trust and gratitude in everything we did, and you'll see that in the film, especially with the troops and between the pilots. Other human interest stuff, no spoilers though. We go to the centrifuge and see the challenges there and how the team overcame those challenges or mitigated those risks by training. It was beautiful. There's another very touching part when we talk about the fact that over the years, 77, 78 years of the team, there have been some tragedies, and that'll bring a tear to most people's eyes. That's a big human element. Just the trials, the personal trials each pilot had, trying to figure it out. How how the team, how the Blues march along in the season as they continue to evolve, if you want to call it that. They get better. So their personal belief levels climb every single day, kind of a kaizen with more meaning and more richness to it and how you improve. So you'll see that played out in these the characters, the cast of characters, who are all real, of course, no paid actors. You'll see that. So there's a lot of wonderful human stuff in there.
It's incredible. One of my like memories of seeing the Blue Angels as a kid is just like seared in my brain is watching a Fat Albert JATO shot as a kid. It's just like the sound, the sight of it, and sadly they don't do the JATO anymore. But Fat Albert is still such a huge component of the team and such a fan favorite. And I wanted to ask you sort of why you think that is. I mean, obviously there's logistical pieces that Fat Albert fills, but from a fan standpoint and the crowds, and why do you think people love Fat Albert so much? Well,
it's so big and visual, right? And the closest a lot of people have ever gotten to flying is in an airliner-sized airplane. And in the demo Fat Albert still does, the airplane gets, because they've got these new engines and new props, it's a newer C-130, it actually gets a climb angle that replicates the JATO climb, which is really amazing. And so I think people, they can track it, they can see it coming back around and has a nice rumble to it. I just think they love it. It's so colorful too, and the big blue and gold and white airplane. It's cool.
And we'll see it in the movie?
Yes. Yep. You betcha.
I wanted to ask you a question actually about the 94 film, Around the World at the Speed of Sound, that I've always wondered about. Was the production for that movie geared around the European tour, or like was it okay, we're gonna go on this European tour, let's get a film crew in, or was the film crew already there and it was just like a happy accident that you guys were going on this huge trip anyway?
Well, here's the way that kind of came down, Evan. There was an opportunity to do a military-to-military exchange program with the Russians. That was the DoD goal, right? To do something where they could come and, I think they came into San Diego with a couple of their ships, and toured and stuff like that. We wanted to be able to go there and show them something. Jack Fennerman, a great guy, Admiral, a good friend of mine, he said, you know what, let's just take the Blue Angels to Russia. Well, it was a military-to-military exchange program, so the Thunderbirds also wanted to do it. So I started seeking a way to get us to have that opportunity, because, obviously it took a year and a half or so ahead of time to start planning how to do this. And I went to a friend of mine that was the CEO of McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis, and I told him about these two opportunities: the Navy getting to go with F-18s that they made there in Missouri, or the Air Force getting to go with F-16s made, I don't know where exactly they're made at, I think in Dallas or Texas or something. And I said, look, I bet you'd love to keep, and your senator would love to keep the people here in Missouri fully employed making more airplanes. And he said, oh, yeah. He said, that's a good thought. By the end of that week, we were selected to go. And so I think as far, and so then I thought we've got to chronicle this, taking a Navy squadron into what has been, the axis of evil, if you will, through the Cold War. We've got to get a chronicle on this, plus the fact that we were going to be able to get in the back seat of their top-of-the-line fighters, and we were going to put them in the back seat of our F-18s. We had a couple two-seaters, each us and the Russian Knights, their aerobatic team, and they flew the Su-27 flanker, but they also had MiG-29s. So all that, I said, we got to get this on film. We got to capture this. And I found a young fella just out of a child actor role, even though he was a college student. He was in Mr. Belvedere as one of the children in that old show. So it goes back a ways. And Rob said, boss, because he'd love to be with the team. And he'd come over to El Centro when we were doing winter training every once in a while and check us out and check in. He said, boss, I'd love to do that. I had tried to find people in the entertainment industry to make the film, but they all said, well, you've got to have Blue Angels walking into McDonald's enjoying a quarter pounder with cheese, or something. I said, no, we can't endorse. We're a public entity, right? So we had to do this on a shoestring. So Rob said, boss, I'll do it. Starting with his company called Vienna Productions, and he's a great guy. And he went with us to Russia and Sweden and a couple of the other countries in Europe that we went to. We went to 8 total countries, flying air shows. And he did a fabulous job. He's a brilliant man. And some of the stuff that was in there about briefing and debriefing and techniques to reach a higher level of performance is still looked at today. So Rob did a wonderful job with that. And so that's how that one got started. And that's how this one got started.
So you've been a movie producer longer than you're officially credited as one.
No, I didn't have anything to do with producing that. I mean, if you think, I guess I kind of pushed it through, I pushed it to the Blues and got a guy to make it. So, I never thought about it that way.
Producer is what you make it, right? There you go.
That's right. You gotta, like I said, when I applied to lead the team, if you have opportunity, don't pass it by. And if you don't get selected or you can't do it, what's the loss?
When you were in Europe, I was just curious. Obviously, that's such a strenuous. The Blues have such a crazy schedule already, and from what I understand, you went from doing like one air show site a week to like 2, maybe even 3. What did you do to like sort of mitigate some of the stresses on the team and keep up with the practice schedule too? Because you don't want to compromise any of the stuff that the Blues are known for just because you have such a crazy schedule.
So right to your original point, 4 air shows a month in the States, pretty rigorous. Flying all over the country, a different show every weekend, to 8 air shows in a month in Europe, with different flight rules, meters instead of feet in a lot of countries. Crowd control was nearly non-existent in Europe, so we had some issues there. A lot of things, everything was different, right? Language barriers, holy smokes. So there were a lot of challenges to that, and how we got it done, I'll attribute a lot of it to advanced planning. We sent 2 guys. Matt Seaman was one of them, great guy, over to Europe to survey and get with the embassies and the defense attaches in each country and talk about how we could get this done. In fact, they looked at a couple countries where we couldn't come to a deal with. So we settled on the 8 that we did. 3 of them former Soviet bloc countries, Romania, Bulgaria, and Russia, which was fabulous. But we flew so much we didn't. We would fly into a Plovdiv, Bulgaria, for example, land, take off, fly around, get our visual checkpoints in sections in a two-plane formation, because we all had to have all these visual checkpoints in towards center point to make the maneuvers look good. And then we would land, look at our checkpoints, and go up and practice. So that was our major practice day, the first day into a city. And then the next day might be a full-blown show, or usually it was a show, a day or two with the show. Very few days off. We took a day or two off in Moscow, maybe one in Romania, but not too many days off. So we were flying almost every day. One of the amazing things about that was the amount of flight time we had on the Blues was so wonderful, and it kept our skills really honed. And it's a fun story, I think. So we get to Russia and we're flying. We flew a show over Moscow, which was kind of disjointed because the coordination that we had kind of got jumbled, and we were able to put something together, but we did, and we got it done. And then we wanted to fly a show for the expats and have them come down to Kubinka, which was the major military base in the Moscow district, for the embassy folks and corporate Americans that were there in Moscow. So they came down, and we flew a show over Kubinka, and with the Russian team going to fly after us. The Russian general, after he saw us fly, he said, "Niet," I think is Russian, right, for no. He didn't let them fly. Oh my gosh, talk about a morale buster. But they were getting like a half the flight time we were. At that point in the history of Russia dissolving the Soviet Union, basically, budget was tough. Meeting the budget was extraordinarily tough for them. So they had a lot less flight time. But they flew well. We took them in the back seats of our airplanes and us in the back seat of theirs. Amazing. So that's, I don't know, I pretty much digressed on that one, but
no,
getting it done was fabulous, and staying, there weren't time zones weren't a huge issue, right? In that sphere, Moscow and then Europe and the countries there, dealing with those issues, it wasn't that big of a problem. And the planning that came in ahead of time was terrific.
Incredible. Niet. Love it.
Yeah.
Nope, not flying today. I wanted to ask you sort of a couple more broad questions about the team. The ethos of the Blue Angels has been talked about a lot, but sort of striving for perfection, right? But you and members of the team have, said repeatedly that perfection is basically impossible because we're all human beings, right?
Right.
On the face of it, it seems kind of like an oxymoron. You're trying for something that you will never achieve. Can you talk a bit about what that means to you personally, and like how you've tried to live and teach that outside of your time on the Blue Angels?
Oh, well, yeah. I think seeking perfection also can be part of that, being unafraid to tackle things that seem unachievable, And I usually, I say that, but in reality, I usually had somebody kind of poking me on, encouraging me. You can do this. You can do this. Come on. I said, no, I can't. No, I can. Yeah, you can. I go. Finally, you go, okay. But yes, it was on the team. I've really glommed onto this quote by Vince Lombardi, the GOAT of all coaches, especially in the NFL. What he would say to his men before they went out to play, he'd say, "We're going to go out today and we're going to seek perfection. We'll never get to perfection, but along the way we'll find excellence." So if you can think about it that way, that there's a fine line between perfection and excellence. So there's always going to be setbacks and things that are going to keep you from achieving perfection, but maybe it's pretty darn good with the way you got it, right? So if you can kind of keep that in the back of your mind, that you may not get to the exact goal that you set for yourself, but press ahead and give it your best shot, and build a team around you, build people that will encourage you and support you. So aside from the blues, you set yourself with high standards, but also set yourself with the fact that strive to achieve perfection, but accept the outcomes because you've given it your best. Accept those outcomes and build on them too. You can do that.
To piggyback off that, I again, kind of a broad question, but I figured you might be a good person to talk about it. I've noticed in my generation in particular, a lot of pessimism about the present, the future, and the world is a tough place, and I understand where that comes from. I've been guilty of it myself. But the Blue Angels to me have always represented kind of an antidote to that thinking, like an ideal to strive for, and a representation of what we can achieve when we come together, work hard, and trust one another. And, the flying isn't simple. I don't need to tell you that, but the idea is simple. How do you talk to folks, like particularly younger folks, about the importance of optimism? Optimism,
yeah. Well, in our society today, we kind of get beaten down with negative things. It's kind of a harsh term, but I say there's a lot of hate bait out there. There's a lot of people baiting us to not like others for whatever reason, right? And it seems that it can even be a almost unsupportable position or unsupportable statement or unsupportable review of something that is given great credence, even though there's not much there. So I talk to young people about, try to gain some perspective on what you're hearing and what you're experiencing, right? Try to seek counter opinions. Try to seek out people that live a different way and enjoy their lives, and find out who's happy out there. Look at the people that are happy. Look at the people who wake up every day thankful, right? Look for those kind of people to help you escape the heavy, wet blanket of depression and fear, right? There's a lot of fear that surrounds us. And find, if you're on polar opposites on something, make a connection with someone out there that you don't quite understand. There's always a way you're going to connect. And if you can find that way to connect and have a shared opinion or a shared way of looking at things, you would be amazed at how much softer that polarization is, how much you start coming together, right? Trying to understand different ways of thinking about things. So, yeah, there's a lot of challenges with young people, with older people, and being willing. Sometimes you get to my age and you think, well, I know everything, right? No, and you actually get sheltered from some of the really good things in life, and so I seek those out. So, but I tell young people, look for examples of goodness in things that scare you, or that you think that you should be hateful about or are resistant. Try to find ways to connect.
Beautiful. I just wanted to close out here with a simple question. What's the one thing you miss the most about being a Blue Angel?
Camaraderie, the teammates, teamwork. You go back, it's so intense. 300 days out of the year on the road, just about. You see your teammates more than you do your families, and you build this trust. So the teammates, the camaraderie, and the ability to fully trust somebody. Wow. And you can find it in daily life, but not as wonderfully as it was on the Blue Angel. So I miss that a lot. And do I miss pulling 7Gs in a blue airplane and full afterburner? Yeah. That would be nice. I'd like to do that again. So I got called back 2 times, right? I still got my flight suit hanging in the closet. So if they get an extremis, I'll...
I don't know. Your career as a movie producer is taking off, so I don't know if you're going to have time for something like that.
No. The real professionals in Hollywood made that movie, right? I was there, watched, gave some ideas, share some thoughts, kept the bond between the production team and the team, the Blue Angels. But to call me a movie producer, well, okay, but thanks, Evan.
Awesome. Well, is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you want to make sure you mention here before we sort of wrap things up?
Well, that's a good question. I think that I would love people to come and see the movie. Back when the coronavirus was in full swing, the Blue Angels and the Thunderbirds got together and they started flying big formation flights over major cities, just not aerobatics, but just it was called America Strong. And I think this movie brings out that America is strong. Americans are strong. They have value no matter what walk of life you're in. I want people to see the movie and see young people from diverse backgrounds, diverse worlds excelling, and the fact that you can be extraordinary in whatever you do, as long as you know that you have support and that you believe in yourself. So I guess that believing in yourself, that's one of my takeaways.
Very, very awesome. Now, you mentioned you do some speaking work as well. Is there anywhere people can go to find information on that?
I work with my old wingman from the 90s, John Foley.
Gucci.
Yeah, Gucci. Gooch. Great guy. We've worked together now for about 10 years. I hang out on his website called johnfoleyinc.com. johnfoleyinc.com. So you can find him there. He does public speaking, and I do it with him. So then you'll find me a little bit on there too, but that's where I am.
Excellent. Gucci, of course, a huge part of the Around the World at the Speed of Sound movie.
Right.
The movie is coming out in IMAX May 17th. That's just under a week from when we're recording this. And then it'll be on Amazon Prime a week later on May 23rd. But it sounds like you're going to want to see this in IMAX.
Yeah. And the part, you mentioned those dates, but here's the hook. On the 23rd, it's no longer in IMAX theaters. So the only time you get to see it, the way it was meant to be seen, the way it was filmed in IMAX, is that 1 week from the 17th to the 23rd. Get out there and see it.
We don't want to miss it. Get your tickets. So, Boss Wooldridge, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day and enjoy the movie release.
Thanks, Evan. Great talking with you. Take care. Glad to be here.